I think the balance between growing population and sound ecology is one that we have to continually revisit. And I think at a northern latitude like this, it has to be less population and more ecology than if we were in some tropical country. I mean, most of the ecosystems that supply our water, clean it, and supply food and things are frozen for 5 or 6 months of the year. So they're not as productive as some of the tropical places like parts of China where people can take a few acres and around a fish pond and grow all of the fish and all of the plants that they need not only to subsist but also to sell for profit. I think sometimes we get too carried away. It's places that don't have enormous population growth are considered to be kind of retarded in some circles, and population growth is considered to be a good thing. And then I talked to some of these people who are making a lot of money in this, and they said, "Oh, I took my RV to my favorite campground last weekend, and I couldn't get in." Said it was all filled up and it was mid-afternoon on Friday, and grumble, grumble. And I went fishing. There's no fish in the lake anymore. It's overfished, and it's ringed with cottages, and all the places I used to catch fish, people have gone in and taken all the logs out and things. Well, they're just not putting the pieces together. I think we have to think about what resources are going to limit our development. Here it's clearly water. And again, there is an old mentality that says, well, we got Peace River up there. Let's just put in a big pipe and pipe it to southern Alberta. And if you look at what would be done with it, growing crops and that, the return on the engineering costs and so on, say nothing of the ecological costs, would be maybe 15 cents on the dollar. That's about an average figure for based on experience in the U.S. Probably makes more sense that if we want the population to grow, to strategically place it where the water is. Or if you are interested in a small town in a dry part in Alberta, you have a choice of 6 patterns of development, choose the one that's going to require the least water. There are industries that don't require a lot of water. Choose one of those to help the town grow, not just disregard water and choose something that doesn't make sense. One thing that doesn't make sense to me right now that I think within 30 years we're going to see is that we use a lot of our scarce water in the south for irrigation. A lot of what we grow with irrigation is alfalfa, which is a very intensive water demanding crop. Then we feed that to cattle, that we hear the grumble that we can't sell the cattle or we can't make a living doing this. Then I look at where we get our food, our food and our fruits and vegetables. They're shipped in from California. And I go to that part of California and I find it's near collapse for similar reasons. They're using all of their scarce water to produce crops that are shipped at great fossil fuel expense to places like Alberta. I think it's time that we started looking at geothermally heated greenhouses. Maybe some of the water that's being used to grow alfalfa ought to be used to grow food for residents of Calgary, for example, first, and probably eventually Edmonton. Geothermal prices are really coming down, and the costs of both producing and transporting food in other parts of the world are really going up. And with the objective that we have to cut fossil fuel use anyhow, seems to me we ought to be starting to make some ventures in that direction. Growing crops for human consumption requires less water because you can do it with things like drip irrigation, and a lot of it for 6 months of the year would have to be done in greenhouses where you can contain a lot of the water. So we could get a lot more for the water, probably the same people doing it because the crops hopefully would be worth more than alfalfa. Uh, so I think we need kind of a cultural change in some parts of Alberta. And if we're not going to make the cultural change, we've got to keep the population low here. We don't have a lot of water to deal with. If we want to keep the place natural and beautiful and have enough water for fish and be able to go swimming somewhere that isn't just a little scum of green slime, these are all things we have to consider. There's nothing that says we have to overwhelm the ecology of Alberta like it's being overwhelmed in some of the far eastern countries. We should be helping them find the path back to a sustainable population over a few generations on their own land, not trying to add them here so that we end up in the same boat that they are.